a jam-packed show on this 1st of July, 2014. You know, we're coming up to the 4th of July this weekend, and I just saw a story on the BBC. Internet billionaire Nick Hanauer warns of a coming revolution. That's right. It wasn't just 1776. It's going to be coming again. The question is, will it be a peaceful or a violent revolution? Will it be a revolution that results in more individual freedom or in an authoritarian police state? Now, he had some interesting things to say. We're going to talk about that. He says that if they don't fix some of the problems, the pitchforks are going to come out. They certainly are. I don't necessarily agree with his solution, but we're going to talk about that. And, of course, we're going to also have, in this edition today, we're going to be talking to author Peter Van Buren. Now, he's not only an author of a couple of books, he was somebody who worked at the State Department for a couple of decades. And so we want to talk to him about his book, which is The Ghost of Tom Joad, the story of the 99%. You may remember that name, Tom Joad. That's the main character from The Grapes of Wrath. If you remember the movie, that was a character that was played by Henry Fonda. And so he kind of brings that into a more contemporary setting. Instead of it being set in the Depression, it's set in Middle America, going into from the 1950s to the current day. Instead of the Dust Bowl, we've got the Rust Belt that he's talking about. So that's going to be an interesting interview because he spent a lot of time in Iraq, and it was just Sunday that the New York Times, specifically James Risen, started talking about how Blackwater guards in the embassy there in Iraq were essentially doing whatever they wished, and even threatening State Department investigators, threatening to kill them, saying, "This is Iraq. I can kill you if I want to, and no one could or would do anything about it. We're in Iraq." That was what the Blackwater people there told the State Department investigators. And shortly after that, we had that massacre of 17 civilians, including a 9-year-old boy in a public square. They're now being investigated for murder. But I want to talk to him about what happened and what he saw there in Iraq. So that's going to be a very interesting interview. We got Paul Joseph Watson joining us at the bottom of this hour. He's going to be talking about the new revelation from the mainstream media. We've been telling you about it for a long time, but I guess you can believe it now because Charlie Rose says so. It's kind of like the old Get Smart series, you know, where he says, would you believe? It's not that we're lying. That's what he was doing when he was doing it. It's that people won't believe us unless it's coming from CBS or PBS or NBC or some other mainstream media. Well, now they're openly talking about how they're using LED lights to monitor people. Yeah, it's no longer a tinfoil hat issue, and it never was. We knew the technology was there, just as we knew that people were looking at you through your laptops. People laughed at Alex Jones for a long time about saying that they were spying on us. Now it's common knowledge, and many people are just pushing back and saying, so what? Well, we're going to talk about the implications of that with Paul Joseph Watson. He has a story up. He also has a story up about how people get used to living in slavery. That's an amazing story. So we're going to go over that article from Paul Joseph Watson. We have another story here. Police arrest a paraplegic man for considering himself to be a pedestrian. And it's not just that they arrested him. They threw him out of his wheelchair face on the ground when he refused to stand up. See, the problem is he's in a wheelchair, as he explained to them, because he is paralyzed from the chest down. And so that's what we see happening here.
Celebrate the spirit of freedom and liberty upon which our nation was founded at InfoWarsShop.com. Molon Lave is ancient Greek for come and take it. This popular design combines both classic Greek Spartan imagery with modern M16 assault rifles. Now available in women's tees and proudly made in the USA. Celebrate the spirit of 1776 with the George Washington brass belt buckle or this incredibly sharp-looking 1776 hat. Badass. And be sure to check out the new arrivals at InfoWars Life, where you can prepare your body to perform at peak levels with Survival Shield Nascent Iodine, Super Male Vitality, and Fluoride Shield. And wake up, America. Immune Support Blend is the healthy choice for the gourmet coffee lover. So get incredibly high-quality, freedom-based products and help fund the revolution at InfoWarsShop.com.
Now, tomorrow is July the 2nd, and one of the ways that you might want to celebrate the 4th of July weekend is go check out a new movie from Dinesh D'Souza. He's been a guest on the Alex Jones Show talking about this movie, talking about how he's being persecuted by the Obama administration because, they do come after anyone who they don't like. Think about the Espionage Act of 1917. For 92 years, it was used 3 times, from Presidents Woodrow Wilson all the way up to Obama. Then within 5 years, he's used it 6 times, mostly against journalists. I was just talking before the break about that story that was broken by the New York Times Sunday by James Risen, talking about how Blackwater felt that they were free to threaten any State Department investigators, said, I can kill you, and there's nothing that anyone could or would do about it because this is Iraq. This is the attitude of Blackwater. And that was just a couple of weeks before the massacre of 17 civilians. We're going to be talking to Peter Van Buren, a State Department official who worked for them for a couple of decades, and he was there shortly before that time. So I want to get his feeling on what's going on in Iraq right now. What was it like to be in that kind of a work environment there at the embassy in Baghdad? And, of course, when he started writing about the failed policies of the State Department, they attacked him, just like they did Dinesh D'Souza. They came after him initially because he linked to something that was put up at WikiLeaks. He didn't leak information, he linked to it. And many people believe that that was a trial balloon for what they would later do to journalist Barrett Browning. So this is an important trend that we see. Of course, they're coming after Dinesh D'Souza. They will find anything that they can come after somebody about, whether it's using the IRS or the FEC, or whether or not they're going to claim that it's national security coming after someone. But Dinesh D'Souza's movie is coming out tomorrow, and there's an article by Jerome Corsi, another frequent guest here of Alex's on the radio show, saying that the left is coming out screaming against his movie before it comes out. They want to give it a lot of attention because his previous movie was the second most popular political documentary of all time, earning $33 million. So they want to shoot this down before it comes out. As Corsi says, the political left is coming out screaming and with guns blazing in an attempt to dampen the audience for the highly anticipated film, America. This is what one of the guys said. This guy's name is Romero. He writes for the He writes for the Daily Beast, and he said D'Souza is a conservative provocateur. And Romano said that he lacked the space to dispute every specious point that D'Souza makes in America, or to highlight every bit of nonsensical sophistry he employs in order to mask the emptiness of his so-called reasoning. Well, there you go. He says he's just throwing factoids against the wall. But he doesn't have the time to address those factoids. So he just doesn't have the space to refute it, so he just calls him names. Just says his arguments are just specious, and I don't have room to refute them. He doesn't even try to address them. He calls them factoids instead of facts. See, it's the language that they use. They always come at you with the language. I thought there was an interesting link on Drudge today, the language of despotism. This came out of the Hoover Institute. And one of the things this article says, they go back, they say it's not just Orwell. In 1984, they said there was a Greek writer who said that words have to change their ordinary meaning and to take that which was now given them in order to control people. Orwell went on to say, politics in the English language, he said, political speech and writing are largely the defense of the indefensible. And they give a couple of examples in this article. They talk about how we've had the term affirmative action. That's been replaced with race-sensitive admissions. And he says, but affirmative action was itself a euphemism for racial quotas in the use of college admissions until they were struck down by the Supreme Court case 1978, Bakke. To salvage racial discrimination, which any process gives race an advantage necessarily requires, Bakke legitimized yet another euphemism, diversity, after a compelling state interest that had justified taking race into account in the university admissions. So they use those terms, and now here's a question for you. One more example he's got here before I get to that. In 2009, of course, there were 13 people killed at Fort Hood by a Muslim Army major, and that's still classified as, quote, workplace violence. Workplace violence. Now, here's a pop quiz. What other term do you hear in the news every day that is propaganda? Time's up. Undocumented immigrants. Undocumented immigrants. See, the illegal aliens are not illegal, and they're not from another country. They're immigrants. They're now living here, and they just don't have their documentation yet. But, of course, the city of New York and other places are going to offer them $5 million to defend them, to provide documentation for them. Everything from library cards to every other form of ID. And I'm sure they'll find a way to get them in as voters, because this is one of the things that this collapse of the border is about, is a massive gerrymandering on steroids. Because, you know, always with gerrymandering, they've made a fine art out of going into a state and creating the districts where they go in and look at the demographics on the computer and pick voter by voter. I remember when I lived in North Carolina, they had one district that was jumping across the street back and forth to try to get the political party that they wanted. I think at that time it was the Democrats. Of course, both of the political parties do that. Now, instead of using computers to pick which voters you want in which districts, they're just going to import the voters into the areas that they want. You know, bring them into California, bring them into New York. And we've got a clip from one of the places in California. Guys, can you cue this up? We have a mayor in California, and he's talking about how the immigrants are going to be brought in about 140 every 72 hours from Texas. And the people are not very happy about it at this town meeting. Can you guys play that?
What we've been told that most of these immigrants are families. These are mothers and young children or fathers and young children.
The mayor tried to reassure constituents their safety is not in jeopardy, but his words did little to soothe a heated crowd.
I'd like to know, sir, do we have a plan? And I'd like to know what that plan is in the event that these people are starting to be dumped all over town.
I'm sorry, I don't feel our officials, and I apologize to everybody, are being really honest.
That's right. They don't feel like they're being told the truth. Well, guess what? Neither do we. We have a story up on InfoWars from Adon Salazar. It's been picked up by the Drudge Report. 2 more swine flu cases confirmed among minor detainees. And this is something that broke over the weekend. We had 2 additional cases of swine flu virus were confirmed amongst the Central American illegal immigrant minors. This is information that came to us from the president of the local Border Patrol Union. He said both cases involving juveniles were confirmed on Friday by medical personnel located at the facility. He also said about 120 people have been isolated due to exposure with the afflicted juveniles. And then on Sunday, he said 2 more children at the Border Patrol station in Brownsville were also isolated, although they have not confirmed that those are H1N1 swine flu viruses yet. This is his comment. This is what the guy who is talking to us at the National Border Patrol Council said. It is contagious, and we're transporting people to different parts of the state and to different parts of the country. And you hear people in California say, what's going on? They're sending 140 people about every 72 hours. You heard the mayor say, and then ICE is going to transport them farther into the country. And that was his point. He said, these minors are being kept in overcrowded facilities ridden with poor hygiene. This is the ideal condition for a viral outbreak. Now, it was just yesterday I talked to Dr. Stanley Monteith on the show, and he was talking about how when HIV was first discovered, that it was treated not as a contagious disease. People were not told how to avoid exposure to it. We didn't do anything. The CDC would not do anything to stop exposure to it or to help people to stop exposure to it. No, it was treated as a political issue. And so now we have not just HIV, because it was also, they said there's increasing worries about immigrants hailing from Honduras that could be affected with HIV. It's not just HIV. It's a whole slew of diseases that have been identified. But of course, as we also reported, the CDC has no interest in this. These border officials, a Border Patrol union has contacted the CDC, asked them for help. They said, it's not our job. It's not their job. Now, one of the things behind this, of course, is we would like to get people to understand is that this is about making NAFTA a fact. As Petraeus said, this is something that was passed 20 years ago. They passed NAFTA. The laws have been on the books. Now they're making it an established fact. It was the law de jure. Now it's becoming de facto. They're making it an accomplished fact. And one of the things that he said in that speech where he said, what comes after America? Well, that's simple. North America. He means North American Union, and he made it very clear that was what he meant. He was talking about how the demographics in all these other countries are falling, in Europe, even in China and other places in Asia, and yet in North America, they're increasing. It's like, really? Really? Are they really increasing? U.S. News and World Report says today that America's evolving look census shows that white deaths are outpacing births. Okay? It's not happening. They're bringing people in for that demographic increase. And yet in the same speech, he talks about how they're going to have to get along with fewer people working. They're not looking at that for the long term. They're not bringing them in for workers.
Do you understand how dark it is? How far down the line we are? How late it is?
Back to the Alex Jones Show. I'm David Knight, your host today. I'm going to be joined in the next segment, Paul Joseph Watson out of the UK. We're going to talk about some breaking articles on Infowars.com. One of them, we've now learned from Charlie Rose, who, of course, we can now trust him, even though Alex has been telling you this for a very long time, that your LED lights can be used to track you, to spy on you, even to determine if you've got firearms. How about that? No paranoia there, because that's Charlie Rose, and we can believe anything he has to say. Also, an amazing article about a guy who lived in a prison and lived as a slave in North Korea, and how he can't get his head around being free. He kind of liked his slavery. So we're going to talk about that with Paul Joseph Watson. Alex Jones also has a special report coming up in the second hour on Agenda 21. You won't want to miss that special report. And we're going to be talking to Peter Van Buren, somebody who for 23 years worked for the State Department. He was talking after he left the State Department about how ineffective things were in Iraq. So we want to talk to him and get his take as someone who's been there, who's been fairly high up in the State Department, get his take on what is going on now in Iraq, and also what we just learned on Sunday about how Blackwater was threatening State Department investigators, threatening to kill them, saying there's nothing you can or will do about this because we're in Iraq. We can do whatever we wish. And that was just a couple of weeks before they had the now infamous massacre of 17 civilians in a public area there in Iraq, including a 9-year-old. Yesterday, we had a Supreme Court decision about the Hobby Lobby, about the mandate, and it was a clash of can the government force us to violate our religious convictions? And, of course, the left was saying, well, this is a corporation because this family business decided to incorporate. Now they no longer have any religious freedom. The Supreme Court said, no, actually, they do. And the Supreme Court, I believe, made the right decision. Now, of course, we had in the dissent, we had some female justices were very angry about this. The Justice Ginsburg said, well, we're going to have a situation now where just anyone, any corporation or anyone can assert that they have religious objections. It's like, yeah, that's what the First Amendment is about. She thought that was just too radical of an idea. She actually used that word. She said it was too radical. We saw that Supreme Court Justice Kagan said that you can't do this. Congress gave an entitlement. They made a law. Well, the First Amendment says Congress shall make no law abridging the free exercise of religion. The exercise of religion. These are not just convictions that we hold quietly in the closet. And, of course, there's been a lot of reactions to this and a lot of hate calling for Hobby Lobby to be boycotted, many people calling for violence, calling for it to be burned down. Of course, doesn't look like the government's worried about that. They would be all over it if somebody was talking about burning down the White House, but you can talk about burning down people's private property and their businesses, and evidently that's not a problem. This I thought was interesting, and along the same line, we see that in Canada, a small town, city council has canceled an event at a city-owned facility last month after learning that the event was going to be sponsored in part by Chick-fil-A. This is a town of about 85,000 people. It was going to be an event that was going to be leased out to a Georgia-based leadership organization there in Nanaimo, British Columbia, I believe is the way it's pronounced. And this is what the city council person said. He said, any events that are associated with organizations or people that promote or have a history of divisiveness, homophobia, or expressions of hate, I didn't know that Chick-fil-A was about hate, will not be permitted by the city. And then he went on to compare them to organized crime. And he said, I think that Chick-fil-A's beliefs are almost to a criminal point of view this day and age. Yes, they nearly have criminalized any dissent with the state religion. And when he compares it to organized crime, we need to realize that if we don't stand for due process for even the worst people, even somebody you don't like, then you're going to lose it for yourself. The RICO statutes were initially created because they couldn't get convictions against organized crime, and it wasn't too long before they were using it against abortion protesters. This is the kind of slippery slope we see, and now it's gotten to the point where they feel like they can go in and confiscate the assets of people. We just had a case where a couple who was accused of stealing medical devices took out a loan on their home, and the government came in and confiscated their funds from that loan that they'd gotten out to defend themselves. So now they're left defenseless, and they justified it in the same way that they justified attacking organized crime and taking away their due process. We have to stand for that, even for the worst in society, or we wind up with this kind of political correctness and tyranny.
Alex Jones here to break down some exciting developments in the area of research concerning supplemental iodine. It's nothing less than phenomenal. I began to get into iodine a few years ago because it was helping me and my family so much get healthy and detoxify. And I used some of the mainline iodine supplements and they upset my stomach and I had some issues with it. Until I discovered a product being developed by Dr. Group, who I was already interviewing as an expert on my radio show, and I began taking the product before he actually rolled it out. You now know it as Survival Shield True Nascent Iodine that your body can really absorb. Then, about a year ago, he said, listen, if you think this is powerful, I'm going to come out with rare earth, deep earth crystals that are incredibly powerful that no one else has as a source for their iodine from between 7,000 and 12,000 feet, literally drilled out of the ground. You put it on a hot plate and it turns into the pure gas. No one else has 99.99% pure iodine. And the results that I personally have had have been life-changing. I was over 270 pounds. And with the iodine, exercise, and better diet, I have lost now more than 50 pounds total, and I'm continuing to lose the weight. I have more energy, my libido, all this crap came out of my skin. I believe our research is conclusive. This is the best iodine out there. And I know this for a fact. Nobody else has got iodine based on these pure crystals, ladies and gentlemen. This is innovating. This is trailblazing. And the best part is it helps fund Infowars.com, the radio show, the TV show, the whole media operation promoting true libertarian ideas. For a limited time, experience the ancient power of Survival Shield X2. Take advantage of this unprecedented 30% off Super Detox special at InfoWarsLife.com.